Few names in music history shine brighter than Sir Paul McCartney. From his groundbreaking days with the Beatles to his decades-long solo career, Paul has written the soundtrack to multiple generations. But while fans often celebrate his legendary songs, what many forget is the incredible fortune he built along the way. A fortune so vast that it rivals entire corporations, and one that has left even his own family emotional. McCartney is not only one of the most successful songwriters of all time, but also one of the wealthiest. His catalog of songs, real estate empire, and savvy business moves have created a financial legacy worth billions. Yet, behind the numbers lies a story that is deeply personal. How this fortune was earned, how it is safeguarded, and why his family finds themselves moved to tears when discussing the empire he leaves behind. To his fans, McCartney is a global icon. To his family, he is a husband, father, and grandfather who turned hardship and tragedy into art and eventually into an inheritance that will forever secure the McCartney name. But as with every great fortune, questions linger. How will it be divided? What challenges will his heirs face? And how does Paul himself feel about the wealth he accumulated from a lifetime of music and relentless work? Today, we dive into the story of Paul McCartney's staggering fortune, the personal journey behind it, and why the legacy he leaves makes his family long before the world knew the name Paul McCartney. There was just a boy from Liverpool with a guitar and a dream. Paul was born in 1942 into a modest working-class family. His father, Jim, was a cotton salesman and part-time musician, while his mother, Mary, worked as a midwife. Life wasn't easy and money was always tight. When Mary tragically passed away from cancer when Paul was just 14, the McCartney household was shaken to its core. Yet, it was from this pain that Paul's love of music became not just a hobby, but a lifeline. By the late 1950s, Paul had joined forces with a fiery young guitarist named John Lennon. Their bond was instant and electric. Soon, George Harrison entered the fold, followed by Ringo Starr, and the world would never be the same. The Beatles were born, and with them came not only cultural revolution but financial opportunity on a scale no one had imagined. At first, the Beatles weren't business savvy. Their initial management contracts heavily favored record companies, publishers, and promoters. But as their fame skyrocketed, so did their earnings. Between 1962 and 1970, the band sold over 600 million records worldwide, generating unprecedented revenue. McCartney, alongside Lennon, became the chief songwriter, penning classics like Yesterday, Hey Jude, and Let It Be. These songs not only dominated charts, but became the foundation of one of the most valuable music catalogs in history. Yet, despite the fame, there was financial turmoil. The Beatles' publishing rights, initially controlled by Northern Songs, slipped away due to poor management decisions. The catalog eventually fell into the hands of ATV Music and later Michael Jackson, who famously purchased it in the 1980s. For McCartney, watching others control the rights to songs he and Lennon had poured their souls into was painful. Still, Paul adapted. He focused on touring, songwriting, and eventually building his own publishing empire. When the Beatles split in 1970, many assumed their golden era was over. But McCartney was just getting started. With his new band, Wings, and later as a solo artist, he produced hits like Band on the Run and Maybe I'm Amazed. More importantly, Paul learned from past mistakes. He became meticulous with contracts, ownership rights, and royalties. Slowly, he built back what had once been lost. His fortune grew not only from music sales, but also from global tours, which often became the highest grossing of their time. By the 2000s, McCartney was pulling in hundreds of millions per tour, filling stadiums worldwide. In addition, his savvy investments in publishing, real estate, and art solidified his status as one of the richest musicians on the planet. For his family, understanding the path from Liverpool's modest row houses to billion-dollar estates is emotional. They know the sacrifices Paul endured, the hardships he overcame, and the battles he fought, not only for music, but for ownership of his legacy. It isn't just about money. It's about resilience. Every pound and dollar represents not just fame, but the perseverance of a boy who lost his mother, young and turned grief into greatness. This journey, from the cobblestone streets of Liverpool to the gilded halls of global success makes McCartney's family emotional, because behind the staggering fortune is a man who never forgot where he came from. His wealth is not only a financial empire, but a living reminder of the struggles that shaped him and the determination that defined him. Cry with both gratitude and awe. When the Beatles officially disbanded in 1970, the world was left in shock. Many believed that no member could ever match the monumental success the group had achieved together. For Paul McCartney, the pressure was enormous. Could he prove that he wasn't just one-fourth of the world's most famous band, but an artist with a vision that could stand on its own? The answer, history shows us, was a resounding yes. And the way he did it would not only cement his artistic legacy, but also create a financial empire that would astonish even his family. The early 1970s were turbulent for Paul. Legal disputes surrounded the Beatles breakup, and the division of assets dragged on for years. But even amidst the chaos, Paul was determined to move forward. He formed Wings with his wife Linda, guitarist Denny Laine, and a rotating cast of bandmates. While critics initially doubted him, Wings went on to dominate much of the decade with hits like Band on the Run, Jet, and Live and Let Die. These records weren't just popular. They sold millions, filling McCartney's pockets with royalties and concert revenue. But more importantly, McCartney began thinking like a businessman. He had learned from the painful loss of the Beatles' song catalog that controlling one's own work was essential. Through MPL Communications, the publishing company he founded, McCartney quietly acquired thousands of song rights, not just his own, but those of other artists. This move turned out to be genius. While fellow musicians struggled with unpredictable income, McCartney secured long-term wealth, as publishing rights generated steady revenue year after year. His empire didn't stop at music. McCartney diversified his wealth through real estate, investing in properties across London, New York, and even the English countryside. His portfolio included not just luxury homes, but also farms and historic estates. Each investment grew in value over the decades, adding tens of millions to his net worth. Touring also became a central pillar of his empire. McCartney's concerts, especially from the 1980s onward, became some of the most lucrative live events in the world. Fans, old and young, flocked to see him perform Beatles classics alongside his solo hits. By the time he entered his 70s, he was still selling out arenas, with individual tours grossing hundreds of millions of dollars. Few artists could command that kind of draw for so long, and Paul did it with seemingly effortless charm. Another often overlooked source of wealth was merchandise and branding. The McCartney name became more than just music. It was a global brand. Albums, memorabilia, books, documentaries, and later digital streaming rights all contributed to the steady growth of his fortune. Even collaborations with other artists, from Michael Jackson to Kanye West, opened new revenue streams while keeping his legacy relevant to younger audiences. What makes this financial empire so moving for his family is the personal philosophy behind it. McCartney never saw wealth as something to flaunt. Despite his billions, he has always maintained a grounded lifestyle. He famously enjoys working on his farm, growing his own food, and living a life that is far simpler than people might imagine for a superstar of his caliber. His children, Stella, Mary, James, and stepdaughter Heather, grew up with the understanding that while their father was wealthy, his success was rooted in hard work and discipline, not extravagance. This humility is what makes the scale of his fortune so emotional for his family. They see not just money, but the embodiment of decades of relentless effort, resilience, and creativity. Every investment, every decision, and every song added another layer to the empire that Paul built, not for vanity, but for security, for his children, grandchildren, and generations beyond. For the McCartney family, watching the empire grow has been both awe-inspiring and humbling. They cry not because of the money itself, but because it represents the life's work of a man who rose from modest beginnings, endured immense loss, and still managed to create a legacy larger than life. When people talk about Paul McCartney's fortune, the numbers often sound unbelievable. Estimates place his net worth at well over $1 billion. making him not only the richest Beatle, but one of the wealthiest musicians in history. Yet to understand why his family gets so emotional when discussing it, one has to look beyond the numbers and into the layers of wealth he has carefully built over decades. The cornerstone of McCartney's fortune is, of course, music. His work with the Beatles, Wings, and as a solo artist continues to generate enormous revenue. The Beatles' catalog alone still sells millions of albums each year, even in the digital streaming age. Platforms like Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube funnel royalties into his estate daily. Then there are publishing rights. Through his company, MPL Communications, McCartney owns thousands of songs from artists across genres, making him not just a songwriter but a music mogul. This publishing empire alone is worth hundreds of millions, and it grows in value with every passing year as new generations discover the music. Touring has also been a financial juggernaut. Well into his 70s, McCartney was headlining world tours that grossed more than $100 million apiece. Ticket sales, merchandise, and broadcast rights all contributed to his staggering earnings. His ability to draw crowds across continents for more than 5 decades is a feat few artists in history can match. Then comes real estate. McCartney owns properties across the globe. Elegant London townhouses, New York penthouses, Scottish estates, and his beloved farm in East Sussex. Each of these holdings is worth tens of millions on its own, together forming a real estate portfolio that rivals that of billionaires outside the music industry. Unlike fleeting fame, land and property provided stability, and Paul made sure his family would always have assets that endure. Art and collectibles add yet another layer. Over the years, McCartney has quietly invested in art pieces and rare memorabilia. These personal treasures, though rarely discussed, hold immense value. Combined with his music catalogs and real estate, they make his estate one of the most diversified in entertainment history. But what moves his family most isn't the sheer scale of the wealth, it's the journey behind it. His children know that Paul's billions were not inherited or handed down. They were built note by note, tour by tour, investment by investment. To them, his fortune is living proof of how one man's creativity and determination can build something that will last for generations. Another emotional factor is Paul's approach to inheritance. Despite his vast wealth, he has publicly stated that he doesn't believe in spoiling his children with unlimited riches. Like many self-made billionaires, McCartney has expressed that he wants his kids to make their own way in the world. He provides for them, of course, but he instills the same work ethic his own father once taught him. His daughter Stella, now a world-renowned fashion designer, often credits her father for grounding her in values of independence despite growing up in unimaginable privilege. This balance between staggering fortune and grounded values is what makes his family tearful. They see not only the financial security he leaves, but also the lessons attached to it. His wealth is immense, but so is his humility. His children and grandchildren inherit not just money, but a blueprint for how to live with integrity even when the world places you on a pedestal. For Paul McCartney's family, the empire he leaves is more than numbers on a bank ledger. It is a reflection of his life's work, his resilience, and his love for them. Each pound and dollar carries a story, from Liverpool's working-class streets to the global stages where he became a legend. It is a fortune that will echo for generations, and it brings tears not of greed, but of gratitude. When people see the headlines about Paul McCartney's billion-dollar fortune, they often focus only on the money. But for his family, the tears come not from the size of his bank account, but from what the fortune represents. To them, Paul's legacy is not about material wealth, but about the journey of a man who rose from hardship, never lost his humanity, and left behind lessons far richer than gold. Paul's children often describe him not just as a rock legend, but as a father who carried deep values. He showed them that success is earned through persistence, humility, and kindness. Stella McCartney, now a world-famous fashion designer, has spoken about how her father always encouraged independence. He didn't want his kids to live in the shadow of his fame or coast on his wealth. Instead, he wanted them to build their own identities. That lesson, rooted in Paul's own working-class upbringing, is perhaps his greatest gift. Beyond family, McCartney's philanthropy reveals another side of his fortune. He has quietly donated millions over the years to causes close to his heart: animal rights, vegetarianism, music education, and humanitarian relief. Unlike some celebrities who publicize their charity, Paul often preferred to keep his giving private, teaching his family that true generosity doesn't need an audience. His wealth, therefore, is not just a private inheritance, but a tool that has already improved countless lives around the globe. Another reason his fortune makes his family emotional is the contrast to his early life. Paul's children and grandchildren know the story of a young boy who lost his mother at 14, who grew up in a modest home without luxuries, and who once doubted whether he'd ever escape Liverpool. The fact that this same boy went on to create not only timeless music but also one of the greatest personal fortunes in history is overwhelming. For his family, every reminder of his wealth is also a reminder of how far he came, and yet, Paul himself has always downplayed his riches. He continues to live simply, cherishing time on his farm, tending to his garden, and surrounding himself with family. For him, life has never been about the money. His fortune is a byproduct of doing what he loved, making music. That humility is what makes his family cry most of all. In their eyes, his true legacy isn't the billion-dollar empire, but the example of a man who remained grounded even while changing the world. Perhaps most moving is the knowledge that Paul's legacy extends far beyond his bloodline. His songs, from Yesterday to Hey Jude, belong to everyone. They are lullabies sung by parents to children, anthems that comforted nations during times of crisis, and melodies that defined youth for generations. His family knows that long after the money is spent or divided, Paul's real fortune will live in the hearts of millions through his music. For the McCartneys, this realization brings both pride and tears. They cry because they understand that Paul's life was not just about accumulating wealth, but about enriching the world with art and love. They cry because the billions he leaves behind are just numbers, while the true inheritance, his songs, his spirit, his values, is priceless. In the end, Paul McCartney's family doesn't just see him as a billionaire rock star. They see him as a husband, a father, and a grandfather who turned loss into art, hardship into triumph, and music into a global language. His fortune may be staggering, but his legacy is immeasurable. And it is that legacy, more than any dollar figure, that leaves his family crying tears of gratitude, love, and awe.